Introducing the Land Care Collective. I'm recording this in Ottawa, Ontario, where I live and work on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. My name is Sandora Alfred Purvis, and I'm speaking to you from my perspective as a person of European descent who is working to cultivate a healthy and reciprocal relationship with the people and ecosystems who have inhabited and cared for this land for millennia. I'm also speaking as someone who has had a lifelong relationship with plants. Much of my work over the years has been in the horticultural and landscaping industries, with over 15 years as a landscape designer. My ongoing search for approaches that created net ecological benefit rather than net ecological harms has led me to the work that I'm now doing to support the creation and cultivation of the Land Care Collective. Acting as the foundation of the collective are 8 principles of land care that I'd like to share with you. First principle, getting to know the life and ecosystem of the land we are partnering with before altering them. In gardening and landscaping, we often rush to create something new rather than learning about what is already present. Rather than defaulting to replacing soil, try to find out more about its physical makeup, whether it is filled with biology or if it has been heavily disturbed, or left without dense plant cover for so long that the soil biology has become sparse and very limited in diversity. These things can all be corrected through proper care. Learn about what plant species are or once were present and where they evolved. Once you start to get to know the plants, what are the species that rely on those plants and the species that feed on the species that rely on those plants? What are the locally available materials you can incorporate into your plans, including local sources of organic matter? What are the sources of water? How does the water move through the land at the moment? Does the water move anything off of the land, such as soil erosion, nutrient leaching, or pollutants? This can include salt from winter ice and snow management. Where does the sun fall in June? Where does the sun fall in September or December? The shadow patterns can change significantly over the course of a year. From learning about the health and composition of the existing soil, to the history of the site and the plants and ecosystem that was once there, to observing how the current life interacts with, affects, and is affected by the site, it takes time to get to know the life of a space and to develop even a basic understanding of how those lives exist in relationship with each other. Taking this time at the start helps to give us a good foundation for nurturing a healthy relationship with the land and ecosystem. Second principle, working to shape human activities to the land before shaping the land to human activities. We often approach a site with the question of how we can shape it to support our current lifestyle and activities. In the world of horticulture and landscaping, the question of how do I shape my life to best suit this place and ecosystem rarely comes up. It is a question worth asking, though. Most spaces hold gifts of possibility. When we alter the land before learning about those gifts, they are often lost. Shaping our activities to the land can also help us learn new skills and to build our capacity to be attentive, observant, and responsive, skills that are valuable in many aspects of life. Altering the land based on our preconceived ideas about what the land should be is costly, both ecologically and financially. Engaging in activities that encourage us to interact with the existing landscape can build our understanding of the space and of the life of the space, which will help us make better decisions when the time comes to make some changes. Seeking always to strengthen the network of life of any place that we interact with. Assembling plant collections, both for the simple joy of acquiring beautiful things and for the slightly or overtly competitive, I have something that you don't, is widespread and deeply rooted in the history of horticulture. Despite this, most gardens host a fraction of the biodiversity that can be found in most healthy landscapes where we aren't actively managing the plant community. Reducing biodiversity of plants is also one of the most common and most complained about garden activities. We generally call it weeding. I'm at the point in my gardening life where I treat weeding as a sign that I obviously neglected to introduce a species to fill an important ecological role, and nature decided to help me out. Nature doesn't always have a good understanding of my plans, though, so I need to take the time to figure out what role my planning and planting neglected to fill, and to be sure to make up for that with something that suits both my own needs and the needs of the ecosystem. Sometimes the solution is as simple as, I need to add another plant to fill a space, or even that the weed is exactly what was needed. Other times, I need to continue to learn and observe before taking an action. A similar approach can be applied to most challenges in a landscape. Identify the source of the challenge and look for a solution that is based on adding diversity rather than reducing it. Rather than killing the bugs, find out what feeds on them and how to attract that species to the area. If there is a disproportion of the types of species that a particular critter likes to feed on in your garden, build diversity by adding more non-palatable plant species to the space. Small, short-term interventions are often needed in young ecosystems that are still recovering from disturbance, but in the long run, reductive solutions become more and more work and less effective, while solutions that build diversity and complexity rely less and less on direct intervention, reducing the time you have to spend on them and the inputs that they require. Assisting displaced life to return to the land being worked with. The majority of people in Canada have little, if any, meaningful relationship with the native life of the local ecosystem. Those who immigrated here back when the land was still mostly filled with native life often actively removed that life to make space for more familiar forms of life such as crops, livestock, and humans with similar cultural roots, or harvested that life and shipped it to Europe or other markets. This has resulted in landscapes, especially in urban spaces, where there is very little native life remaining. Many, if not most, of the plant species in our tended landscapes are growing wild in urban and suburban spaces and along many roadways, are often plants introduced from Europe and Asia. While humans are a native species to this land, and we have the option to choose to behave in ways that support the flourishing of native life, many plant species are biologically limited in their capacity to support the layers of life that have evolved to be supported by native plant species. As caregivers in the ecosystem, one of the services we can provide is assisting the life that was displaced to return to the spaces that it has been excluded from. This includes the human life and cultural practices that have been excluded from much of the urban landscape for more than a century. Respecting and supporting the right of an ecosystem to progress toward complexity. Many landscape and garden practices attempt to keep landscapes at a fixed point in early stage progression. Ecosystems naturally tend to move toward complexity and diversity. This is led by the plants, but it takes place in the soil, in the insects and other vertebrates that feed on the plants, in the birds, mammals, amphibians, and all the other layers of life that rest on the foundation of the plant community. When we actively suppress plant diversity and growth, we limit the capacity for diversity through the rest of the system. We can guide ecosystems toward a form of complexity that sustains our lives and meets our needs, but moving away from the harsh, recurring interventions that keep them in early stage simplicity is both far healthier for the ecosystem and far less work for us in the long run. The sixth principle. Understanding where the materials or energy we work with are drawn from and where they will go if or when they move beyond the site. Horticulture and landscaping extract and transport massive quantities of materials from ecosystems and relocate them to urban and suburban spaces where their condition generally declines until they are removed and replaced with more newly extracted materials. We don't make soil, we move it around. We extract organic matter from peat bogs, wetlands, agricultural systems, and forests. We quarry stone in huge quantities for paving, retaining walls, manufacturing concrete, and the gravel-based material for under patios, retaining walls, and synthetic turf. We also rely on a lot of fossil fuels, both in the transportation of bulk materials and plants and for heating greenhouses. The marketing of flowers as instant gratification commodities has led to growing them in larger and larger containers. Remember when annuals came in 6-packs that allowed for 72 plants in a flat? Those same flats now often hold only 32 or 48 plants, if that. This trend has driven up the amount of heated greenhouse space, peat moss, and plastics that go into producing the same number of plants for our gardens. The full life cycle of a lot of materials is very opaque. Tracing the source of everything that comes into a space, determining where it will go if it leaves, and ensuring that that destination is not the mythical away is challenging, to say the least. Mapping that path can definitely lead to greater appreciation of materials that are already on-site, hyperlocal, reclaimed, or repurposed. Seeking to always return more than we take and to never take beyond a system's capacity to regenerate. Healthy plant-based ecosystems generate more than they consume. Plants convert solar energy into the biomass and carbohydrates that provide the energy for the rest of the ecosystem. We humans aren't so talented when it comes to simple, straightforward support of other lives. There are services that we can provide that support the overall ecosystem, though. We can move water to where it is most needed when it is most needed. We can gather and care for seeds, placing them back into the ecosystem at appropriate times and places. We can shift soil and contours to help rainwater soak into the soil. We can protect young plants to help ensure they survive to support the ecosystem when they mature. We can be long-term thinkers, and we can deliberately move ourselves and other materials around. While these skills have most recently and widely been applied to extracting from ecosystems, they can be turned toward tending the health of ecosystems. Our care is especially important at this time when systems have been heavily disrupted and can benefit massively from our capacity to bring plants to the spaces where they can thrive and return to their role of supporting complex ecosystems. We are in quite a deficit at the moment, so this work needs to be paired with minimizing extraction from systems, moving toward working with the materials that have already been gathered, maintaining, repairing, repurposing, cycling organic matter into the soil and away from landfills, etc. There is no way to throw things, and there is no elsewhere to draw new things from. All the systems are connected, and they are currently overwrought. The interesting side benefit is that tending to the recovery of overwrought ecosystems frequently also leads to the recovery of our own overwrought nervous systems and our survival on the planet. That too. And finally, acknowledging that humans are heterotrophs. We cannot photosynthesize, so we must draw our energy from the lives of other beings. Plants are the basis of the ecosystem, photosynthesizing to convert solar energy into a form that supports all of the other layers of the ecosystem. We don't have this ability, so we have to rely on the lives of other beings to maintain our own. We are entirely reliant on the system for our survival, tied to it through the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the water that is cleaned by the plants and the biology they host. Separating ourselves from the rest of the ecosystem because we feel that all we have to offer is harm isn't only a misunderstanding of what we are capable of, it isn't feasible on any significant scale. We owe respect and reciprocity to all those we rely on for our survival. Part of that responsibility is to not ignore or dismiss the costs of our actions. Another part is to learn about what gifts we can offer in return. Which brings me to the origin of the Land Care Collective. While the current landscaping and horticultural industry is filled with processes and practices that cause extensive ecological harms, at its foundation, it's about creating and maintaining spaces that make people feel good. There is a growing number of people who are either doing the work of caring for spaces in healthier ways or who want to be doing that work but haven't found a place for a care-centered approach in the existing industry. There is an increasing amount of public interest in supporting pollinators and songbirds and growing native plants, as well as in gathering food from the spaces we tend instead of from faraway farms. There is widespread and rising anxiety about the decline of global biodiversity and the increasing likelihood of widespread ecosystem collapse, something that many people feel helpless to do anything about. Being able to do something about overwhelming problems feels good. We spend our money on the things that make us feel good. In Canada, $8 billion is currently spent every year on making and tending landscapes and gardens to make people feel good. If we tell the story of how shifting to a care-centered relationship with land and plants isn't only feasible, it's a vital part of larger climate health and ecosystem solutions, we can shift a great deal of that money to supporting livelihoods founded on caring for the ecosystems that support and surround us. The Land Care Collective is intended to help create an ecosystem of support and sharing of information, stories, and resources for the people working to change the narrative of how we relate to and care for the spaces where we live and the life that shares those spaces with us. We will continue to add material to the landcarecollective.org website over the coming months, including information from and about people and businesses offering land care services here in Ottawa, and a list of upcoming events and learning activities. In addition to the collective, you can find more about land care through the Society for Organic Urban Land Care and can take online courses in the practice of land care through Gaia College. I'd also like to offer my thanks to Sarah Walker for creating the Land Care Collective logo.